Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington as the war with Iran nears the 3-week mark, and the Pentagon appears to be ramping up operations amid new attacks today across the region, including in Jerusalem's Old City. All of this while President Trump continues to suggest the war will be ending soon. Just moments ago, the president speaking to reporters about the ongoing war while leaving the White House.
Well, we've been hitting them awfully hard. I mean, I don't know if you can possibly get hit harder, but these are thugs and animals and horrible people. But you can't hit anybody harder than we've hit them.
Do you think Israel will be ready to end the war when you're ready?
I think so, yeah.
Mr. President,
The relationship's a very good one. I think so. You know, we want more or less similar things. You know what we want? We want victory, both of us, and that's what we've got. Well, look, we can have dialogue, but we don't. I don't want to do a ceasefire. You know, you don't do a ceasefire when you're literally obliterating the other side.
When the war first began, President Trump suggested it would last just 4 to 6 weeks. And as we close in on the start of the 4th week, President Trump has repeatedly said in recent days that war will be over soon.
Won't be long. And we're going to have a much safer world when it's wrapped up. It'll be wrapped up soon, but we're not ready to leave yet. But we'll be leaving in the near future. We'll be leaving in pretty much the very near future. As soon as that war's over, which will be soon, your prices are going to drop like a rock. And it's going to be over with pretty soon.
But despite those comments, the Pentagon is accelerating its deployment of thousands of Marines and sailors to the Middle East. That's according to 2 people familiar with the decision. These images show some of those U.S. service members departing San Diego for the region. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Israeli emergency crews are scrambling after a major attack on Jerusalem's Old City. This was the moment of that strike when falling missile fragments hit. The IDF says bomb squad and border guard soldiers are at the scene to collect evidence. NBC's Richard Engel is making his way to near where that strike happened in Jerusalem and will join us shortly. But joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, as well as NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube. Monica, I do want to start with you. As we mentioned, the president has repeatedly said this war will be over soon, but is it clear right now what soon means?
No, it's really not, Gabe. And the president kind of is giving this answer over and over again and has for the last 10 or 12 days. He indicated at what point when he was down in Florida that he thought it could be wrapping up, quote, within days. And again, that was about 12 days ago. So it is really unclear what the president means when he says this. And he started off this week sort of trying to project that again, saying that this was potentially wrapping up. But you also see the president taking decisions and making important decisions about potentially these additional resources that are going to be sent to the region, which suggests that the president is also obviously considering options that would mean that this ongoing massive military operation could last a little bit longer than that. So the president, on one hand, does want to seem to project that this could be winding down, but we don't know, on the other hand, what soon means. And originally, of course, the timeline was supposed to be somewhere in the 4 to 6 week timeline. And the president also likes to say, and just said moments ago, he believes he is weeks ahead of schedule. So if we're at about the halfway point of that, but also ahead of schedule, again, the president hasn't totally been able to put an exact time frame on what he means by soon. Gabe.
And Monica, oil prices continue to creep up as Iran continues to target energy infrastructure in the Gulf. And there are still, of course, major concerns about the Strait of Hormuz. What are we hearing from the president about that situation?
Yeah, and he's trying to also there project that the reason for concern shouldn't be that high. He even is trying to argue that he believes that the price of oil would be even higher, that he doesn't believe it is as high as he thought it could go based on what we're seeing. But you also are seeing the Trump administration take this pretty seriously and talk about some potential ways in which they can mitigate the oil prices. You saw this week the waiver of the Jones Act, that 100-year-old statute that essentially makes it a little bit easier to use other vessels to move goods, which means that this can more freely flow between U.S. ports to be able to transport that, which, again, might help eventually. But people aren't going to see the short-term gain or effect of that in the coming weeks. And the White House, the vice president, for instance, has admitted that he believes this is going to be a rough road for the weeks ahead, calling it a temporary blip and trying to brace people for the reality that it is going to be a little while before those gas prices come down. Gabe.
Monica Alba at the White House. Courtney, I want to shift to you. What do we know about this newest deployment? We saw that video of some U.S. service members leaving San Diego. When are they expected to arrive? What else do we know?
So this is the USS Boxer that we just saw with Marines and sailors on board. It's part of another one of these ARGMUs that we've talked about before, the Amphibious Ready Group, Marine Expeditionary Unit. Basically what that means is it's 3 U.S. Navy ships with several thousand U.S. sailors, plus about 2,200 to 2,500 Marines on board. And those are Marines who are very specially trained for missions like amphibious landings. So landing on an island that's potentially hostile or contested and taking a piece of land. They're also good at seizing ports, seizing airports, those sorts of things. So they just left San Diego, and we were, according to several officials we spoke with yesterday, they said they're actually headed to the Middle East. But amphibious assault ships like this one, they don't move very fast. So we're probably a couple weeks out.
Well, potentially landing on an island. The gas field?
What these Marines and these sailors do is they bring options for President Trump. They give him the option for, there's another MU that's on its way there. It's much closer, actually, coming from the Asia Pacific. Now, if there are 2 Marine Expeditionary Units there, that is thousands of Marines who have this very highly skilled, specialized training. And they operate as a unit, and they're very self-contained, meaning they have their own aircraft. They have their own ability to sustain themselves. It gives the president options for more boots on the ground, should he decide to do so.
And potentially, what does that mean for the Strait of Hormuz? Could these perhaps escort tankers?
I think escorts are probably less likely at this point, but there are other options that they could use boots on the ground that would help potentially open up the Strait of Hormuz. Because, look, the threats still exist right now. And so what they have to do is just slowly degrade those threats. They've gone after some of the anti-ship missiles. They've gone after some of the drones. They've gone after some of the mines. They still have the Mosquito fleet, you know, these small, fast boats. Those still exist, but they're trying to take those down, too. They really need to degrade that threat capability before they could talk about any kind of boots on the ground. So we're days out.
And before I let you go, yesterday the president confirmed, and also Secretary Hegseth talked about, you know, asking Congress for more money, potentially some $200 billion to help fund this war. How fluid is that number, you think? And what did you make of the Republican hesitancy on Capitol Hill? Unclear, you know, where this goes, whether there will actually be some backlash to President Trump. Typically on the Hill, there isn't. Yeah. But in this particular case, how fluid do you think this will be? Could we see a much higher number before too long?
I can't envision a scenario if this war continues for weeks more where that number doesn't go up more. Because what this is largely paying for is replacement of munitions and weapon systems and things. And by the way, you know, Iran has taken out quite a bit of U.S. military hardware. We don't have a whole lot confirmed, but there's reports of radar systems and communication systems in the region. We know they've taken out a number of drones, expensive drones. We saw the tragic crash of 2 KC-135s. One of those was completely lost. So that's nothing to say of the defensive munitions, the interceptors that have been used, and all of the offensive weapons. And listen to Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth himself. Every single time he briefs, he says that it's going to be the most intense day of bombing yet. So they're using a tremendous amount of munitions for this, and it comes at a high cost.
Courtney Kube, our senior national security correspondent. Thank you so much, Courtney. Thanks. And we'll turn now to our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who has made his way to Jerusalem, where, as we mentioned, those missile fragments fell this afternoon on the Old City. Richard, we're 3 weeks into this war. There was a major incident in Jerusalem today. What do we know about that situation?
So we're 3 weeks into this war. I was just listening to your segment with Courtney and her, as always, excellent analysis and reporting about where this could be going, and the Marines that specialize in beach landings heading toward the Straits of Hormuz. What happened here in Jerusalem today could have changed this war profoundly and made it into something unlike what we have seen thus far. Earlier in the afternoon, Iran fired a missile at Israel. Behind me, that is the old city. You see these walls? These are the walls of the old city. It is a small place, a kilometer by a kilometer. On the screen, you see the explosion. If you go back, you'll find the video that shows an Iranian missile in the air over the old city. It's intercepted by an Israeli interceptor. It breaks in half, according to Israeli police, and then the warhead, with what they described as dozens of kilograms of explosives, blows up right there inside the old city. Now, astonishingly, some would say miraculously, because the old city is full of religious sites. It is a jewel box of holy sites. It hit in one of the few relatively empty places. There weren't even any injuries. But just yards away from where that explosion took place is the Wailing Wall. Really, just yards away, a few hundred yards away, is the Wailing Wall. On top, which is the holiest place in the world for Jews everywhere. There, just on top of the Wailing Wall, sits the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and today, which is holy for Muslims, and today is a Muslim holiday. It is Eid. And just a few hundred yards from that is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the holiest place in the world for Christians, where Christians believe that Jesus was crucified and entombed and rose from the dead. So had this missile exploded almost anywhere else in the old city, we could be having a very different conversation right now, and this war could have become a religious war. That shows how dangerous all of this is, and how much there is a potential risk for a much more significant escalation, unlike anything we've seen thus far.
Quite remarkable, Richard. And as we mentioned, President Trump has repeatedly said that this war will be over soon. I know you were able to question Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. Do you get the sense from your reporting on the ground that Israel sees it that way?
So let's hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then on the backside, we'll talk more about how, based on what just happened here today, and the upcoming military activity that we're going to see in the Strait of Hormuz, at least upcoming military presence, how this war could potentially be far less predictable than the leaders of Israel and the United States and Iran may even anticipate. Here's Netanyahu.
The war is popular here in Israel. It is not popular with many Americans. So my question was, how do you see this ending? Not why, not even when. What do you imagine the day after will look like?
Well, we have achievable goals, and I'm not going to speak about the full battle plans that we have with the United States. We're well coordinated with them. And I hope that in time, people will see the wisdom and the courage of President Trump's decision and his leadership, and the fact that we're working together. America is not fighting for Israel. America is fighting with Israel for a common goal, to protect our future, to protect civilization against these barbarians.
So Prime Minister Netanyahu, in that briefing to a small group of reporters, laid out the military objectives and, to a degree, the long-term objectives from Israel's point of view. He said the U.S. is in charge, that Israel's an ally. That's how he was framing it. And he was emphatic saying that Israel didn't drag the United States into this war. I think that was probably his main point that he was trying to convey, certainly one of his main points. But he said that the military objectives are to take the missiles away, take the nuclear program away, and weaken the regime to a point in which the people can rise up and overthrow it. Then he also talked about a longer-term vision where oil doesn't only flow through the Strait of Hormuz, but flows through pipelines that cross overland and end on the Israeli coast in the Mediterranean. So he's talking about also redefining economic relationships in the long term for this region. But going back to what happened here a few hours ago, it only takes one incident for this war to become emotional. A holy site that is hit, a building that is hit full of people. We saw the world's tallest building in the world in Dubai almost hit by a drone. Any one of these kind of incidents that turns it from a war where the leaders think they know what their objectives are into one that is very hard to control and becomes emotional and self-sustaining.
Richard Engel reporting in Jerusalem for us. Richard, thank you. And joining me now is Israel's ambassador to the United States, Dr. Michael Leiter. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. We really appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Gabe. Thank you.
Ambassador, I wanted to get your reaction to this news we're getting out of Jerusalem with those missile fragments that are impacting the old city. What's your reaction to that?
Well, not surprised. Just 2 days ago, missiles from Iran hit very close to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now they've hit very close to the Dome of the Rock. They don't care where these missiles are hitting. They try to kill as many people as possible and damage sites that are holy both to Islam, Christianity, and Judaism.
Ambassador, I also want to talk to you about President Trump saying that he instructed Prime Minister Netanyahu not to hit gas fields after that attack on that massive facility. Is that something that, is that a commitment that Israel will continue to keep if Iran keeps attacking our country?
Gabe, we're in this together. This is a collaborative effort. We've been planning it for many, many weeks. We're implementing it together. And when the President of the United States expresses an interest that a certain site will not be hit, we, of course, honor that. The Prime Minister said that in his press conference last night. We acted alone in attacking the gas field. And by the way, this gas field does not affect international prices, global prices. This is an energy site for the Iranians. And the intention was to put pressure on the Iranian regime, not to spike oil prices around the globe.
And you have repeatedly said, you've repeatedly talked about your close collaboration with the United States. I've watched many of your interviews, and you just said, essentially, you're working in lockstep with the U.S. If that's the case, why did you go and hit this facility without telling President Trump, as he says?
Well, there was an initial report by the White House that it was in tandem. The important thing to understand is that we acted alone, and the moment the president said he doesn't want it hit again, we, of course, conceded and ceased the attack.
So NBC News does have reporting, according to a U.S. official, that Israel did give the United States a heads up about this attack. You dispute that?
Look, I'm not disputing anything or conceding anything. The issue here is that we're collaborating very closely. We're flying wing to wing and shoulder to shoulder. There are hundreds of planes in the air at the same time. We have a division of labor over the skies of Iran. And this operation, both Roaring Lion and Epic Fury, is proceeding according to plan together.
Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday that regime change in Iran would require some kind of ground component, although he wouldn't elaborate. Does Israel believe that the goals of this war could be achieved without boots on the ground?
We think there have to be boots on the ground, but Iranian boots on the ground. The people of Iran have to topple this regime. We have to set the stage. We have to make sure that we have a situation in Tehran where there's not a regime which is producing nuclear weapons. I mean, just imagine if what hit you, your first question, we had a missile hit very close to the Dome of the Rock. Imagine that was nuclear tipped. Imagine that the missiles being fired into all of our neighbors in the Gulf, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Oman, were being hit with nuclear weapons. They hit Cyprus, they hit Turkey. Imagine they would be tipped with nuclear weapons. So we need a regime that is not producing nuclear weapons, is not producing thousands of ballistic missiles that can hit its neighbors, and is not funding proxies around the region.
Now, President Trump, a few moments ago, was just asked if he believes that Israel will be willing to end this war when he is, and his response was, I think so. What's your response to that?
Well, who am I to comment on the president's statement? But I think so, too. We have planned this together. We're implementing it together. And the grand finale will come together as well.
Well, top intelligence officials yesterday on Capitol Hill, they said that Israel and the U.S. have slightly different goals when it comes to this war, especially when it comes to regime change. Let's listen.
The objectives that have been laid out by the president are different from the objectives that have been laid out by the Israeli government.
The president's objectives with respect to Operation Epic Fury did not include regime change. That may be different from what Israel's objectives were.
So will Israel continue any military action against Iran if there is not a new regime in place?
Let me try to finesse that a little bit. There are primary objectives and secondary objectives. The primary objectives are absolutely in tandem. The primary objective is, as I said, no more ballistic missiles, no more nuclear-tipped enriched uranium, no more support for proxies. Can that be achieved without a regime collapse? We don't think so. So we need at least for the regime to collapse. Change must come by the Iranian people themselves. So we're not into regime change, we're into regime collapse.
What will your message be to Republicans on Capitol Hill? Because now that the president yesterday confirmed that his administration will ask Congress for some $200 billion to fund this war, some Republicans, of course Democrats, but at least some Republicans have seemed a little hesitant at that price tag. They say they're going to look into it. What would you tell those Republicans on the Hill as they look forward to potentially funding this war to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars?
If I'm asked about the war, I'm certainly not going to wade into a financial issue here on the Hill. But if I'm asked about this war, I think if in the 1930s we would have invested in preventing Adolf Hitler from launching the Second World War, we would have saved a hell of a lot of money. And a lot of lives, 65 million lives were lost. The new Nazis of today are the Ayatollahs of Tehran. And they will launch a war which will take the lives of millions and millions of people. They have to be stopped. Mm-hmm. And if there is a necessary investment now to stop this march of tyranny by this regime, this brutal regime, it's a worthwhile investment.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador, I want to turn now to Lebanon. Our team in Lebanon is reporting that there are growing fears in the south of Lebanon that Israel may be preparing for some sort of ground incursion into Lebanon, given the fighting there. What is Israel's goal in Lebanon?
We have one goal. No Hezbollah missiles fired into our towns and villages. Last Sunday, there were plans of the Radwan forces of the Hezbollah to try to penetrate our northern border the same way Hamas did from Gaza on October 7, 2023. We have to prevent that, Gabe. We're not going to allow our citizens to be fired upon by Hezbollah missiles at their whim. Mm-hmm. So there is already a ground incursion into Lebanon by our forces, and we're going to be there just a few kilometers in to prevent Hezbollah from firing anti-tank missiles. They fire anti-tank missiles into residential buildings. Just imagine that. We can't allow that to happen. Now, if the Lebanese armed forces would move down south and would prevent Hezbollah from doing it, we're out of there. We have no interest in being in South Lebanon. We want peace with Lebanon. We can have a marvelous peace with Lebanon, with trade and with tourism and with financial institutions. We want peace with them, but we can't have Hezbollah, which has raped their country, which has taken it over, sapped it of its strength, and basically is dominating their foreign policy, which is firing missiles into Israel.
Ambassador Dr. Michael Leiter, we thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you, Gabe. Thank you.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.